You know that feeling when you're half asleep and you start falling into an abyss, your stomach doing flips. That's how this city feels all the damn time. But last night was the main event, the grand descent into madness, and I was riding shotgun, no seatbelt. I am a detective, or at least that's what the badge says before it's swallowed by the night's shadows. This city, though, it's more than just streets and neon lights. It's a living, breathing entity that thrives on nightmares, and business is booming. The call came in at 3 a.m., a time when only two types of people are awake, the ones running from their demons and the ones too messed up to care. The voice on the line was the former, panicked, whispering about a body that wasn't just dead. It was wrong. I told him I'd check it out, not because I cared, but because curiosity is a hell of a drug. I rolled up to the scene in my beat-up sedan, the engine coughing like a chain smoker on a bad day. The location was one of those abandoned warehouses where hopes and dreams go to die, now just playing host to the city's refuse, both trash and human alike. Stepping inside, my flashlight cut through the darkness like a knife, revealing graffiti that looked more like ancient runes than tags. The air tasted like copper and decay, and every step echoed, announcing my arrival to whatever called this place home. Then I saw it, or rather it saw me first. The body, if you could still call it that. It was pinned to the wall, limbs twisted in impossible angles, skin stretched taut over bones that were sharply defined, as if whatever flesh had once existed was now just, gone. But the eyes, man, the eyes were the worst part. They were wide open, staring into nothingness, yet filled with a terror that spoke of sights no living being should witness. I've seen my fair share of dead bodies, but this was different. This was a message written in blood and terror, and I was damn sure it wasn't meant for the cops. It was for me. The investigation should have started with questions, witnesses, maybe some canvassing. Instead, it kicked off with a scream, a guttural sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and just like that, I was no longer alone. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, shapes that seemed human but moved all wrong, whispering promises of madness. I did what any sane person would do. I ran, not because I was scared. Okay, maybe a little scared, but because I needed answers, and whatever was whispering in the dark wasn't talking. The city streets welcomed me back with open arms, the neon lights blurring into psychedelic waves that made my head spin. I needed a drink, or maybe 10, but more than that, I needed to know what kind of nightmare had just added me to its guest list. I needed leads, something to chase besides my own tail. But in this city, asking questions is like throwing punches in the dark. You never know what you're gonna hit until it hits back. The first stop was the Underbelly, a dive bar so deep in the gutter even the rats had to look down to find it. The place was a circus of the damned, hustlers, junkies, and freaks, all dancing to the tune of despair. I slid onto a stool at the bar, the wood sticky with sins of the past. Whiskey neat, I told the bartender, a guy with more scars than skin. He poured, and I swallowed the burn, feeling it chase away the chill of the warehouse. I didn't have to wait long for trouble to sidle up next to me, smelling like trouble and bad cologne. "Heard you've been looking into the warehouse gig," he murmured, his voice a gravel road. I sized him up, noting the way his eyes darted around, twitchy. "And if I am," I shot back, my tone as sharp as a switchblade. He slid a piece of paper across the bar, a name and an address. "Start here and watch your back. Shadows ain't just shadows no more." Before I could ask more, he vanished into the throng, leaving me with more questions and a burning curiosity that tasted like poison. The address led me to the heart of the city's decay, a building so twisted it seemed to groan under the weight of its own misery. The whispers started the moment I stepped inside, voices that clawed at the edges of my sanity, promising delights and terrors in the same breath. I pressed on, the beam of my flashlight a lone star in the suffocating dark. The air was thick with something unspoken, a pressure that felt like eyes watching, waiting. Then the shadows moved. Not the flicker of light and dark I'd known all my life, but a writhing, sentient darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. I spun, shotgun drawn, only to find nothing but the echo of my own rapid breaths. A laugh, low and menacing, echoed through the corridors, and I followed, my every instinct screaming to run the other way. The chase was a blur, a mad dash through halls that seemed to shift and change before my eyes, walls bleeding shadows like ink in water. I stumbled into a clearing, an open space swallowed by darkness, and there it was, the source of the whispers, a figure cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing pits of despair. "We've been waiting for you," it hissed, its voice a symphony of every scream I'd ever heard. My shotgun was useless, I knew that much. This was a battle that couldn't be won with bullets. I needed answers, but standing before this embodiment of fear, all I could think was, "Be careful what you wish for." The shadow surged forward, and I braced for the end, only for it to pass right through me, leaving a trail of ice in its wake. When I turned, it was gone, but the whispering had grown louder, a cacophony that threatened to drown me. I fled, the whispers chasing me, spilling out into the streets where the neon lights flickered and bled into the night, painting the world in hues of madness. Back in the relative safety of my apartment, the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a mind teetering on the edge of breaking. But there was no rest for the wicked, nor for those who hunt them. The city's secrets lay bare, whispering, always whispering, and I knew then that sleep would be a stranger for many nights to come. My mind was a war zone, thoughts colliding like bullets on a battlefield. Sleep had abandoned me, leaving me alone with the echoes of whispers that seemed to seep through the cracks of my apartment. The city outside my window was a beast in slumber, but I knew better. It was just biding its time, waiting for the next round of chaos. The lead from the dive bar, the address that was supposed to be my next clue, had only plunged me deeper into the abyss. Shadows that moved with intent, whispers that knew my name. It was like the very fabric of reality was coming undone at the seams. I needed answers, and there was only one place left to go, the source of all the city's nightmares, the lab that had birthed this insanity. According to whispered rumors, they'd been experimenting with something called D-7, a synthetic compound that promised to expand the mind beyond the confines of reality. Instead, it seemed to tear holes in it. Armed with nothing but my dwindling sanity and a stubborn streak that had gotten me through more scrapes than I cared to remember, I made my way to the lab. It stood on the outskirts of the city, a monolith of glass and steel that glinted under the moonlight like a blade. The front door was a joke, security non-existent. It seemed that whatever had happened here had left the place abandoned, or maybe whatever was inside had no need for security. Inside, the air was thick with a chemical tang that made my head spin. I pressed on, past rooms filled with scientific paraphernalia that looked more like torture devices, vials of liquids that glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. And then I found it, the D-7. It was just sitting there, on a lab bench like a forgotten lunch, a syringe filled with liquid shadow. I knew I should have turned back, but the whispers were a siren song, luring me into the depths of madness. I needed to see, to understand. I injected myself with D-7, and the world exploded. Colors that didn't exist burned their way across my vision, realities layered upon each other, like translucent pages in a book. I saw the city for what it truly was, a nexus of pain and fear, bleeding wounds that wept shadows. And the whispers? They were screams, millions of them, every lost soul the city had claimed. I was falling, or maybe flying, through dimensions that twisted and turned on themselves like snakes. Time lost all meaning as I was thrust into a kaleidoscope of horror and beauty, so profound it threatened to rip my mind apart. And then I saw it, the heart of the nightmare, a darkness so deep and vast that it swallowed everything else. It pulsed with a malevolent life, tendrils of shadow reaching out, touching minds, infecting them with madness. I understood then that the lab, the D-7, it was all just a key, a way to open the door to something that should have remained locked away. And I had walked right through it. As the effects of the D-7 began to wear off, reality settled back around me like a cloak of lead. I was back in the lab, but everything had changed. I could see the shadows now, even without the drug. They clung to the edges of my vision, waiting. I staggered out of the lab, the city greeting me with open arms and a knife to the back. The shadows weren't just in my mind anymore. They were everywhere, infecting the streets, the buildings, the people. I had gone down the rabbit hole, all right, and come out the other side into a nightmare that was all too real. The detective, the seeker of truth, was dead. In his place was something else, a man who had seen the abyss not just stare back, but blink you. The city's underbelly was a canvas painted in blood and shadow, and I was the brush streaking across its surface with a desperation born of madness. The D-7 had torn the veil from my eyes, revealing a world infested with horrors that writhed just beneath the skin of reality. I could see them now, always out of the corner of my eye, shadows that moved with malicious intent, whispering of despair and doom. Armed with the knowledge that I was walking into the maw of madness, I pushed forward. Every step was a battle, the air thick with the stench of corruption, the ground slick with the remnants of shattered minds. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony that sought to drown me in its despair. They spoke of the end of a world consumed by darkness, but I clung to the sliver of rage that burned within me like a beacon. I would not go quietly into that good night. The epicenter of the horror was a place that defied logic, a building that twisted upon itself in impossible geometries, its windows like gaping maws that yearned for the taste of souls. It was here, in this cathedral of despair, that the heart of the abyss beat with a relentless fury. The doors opened before me, not with a creak of hinges, but with a sigh of anticipation, as if the darkness itself welcomed its wayward son. I stepped inside, the light from my flashlight swallowed by the oppressive gloom. What I saw within those walls defied description. It was as if reality itself had been flayed open, exposing the raw, pulsing flesh beneath. Shadows danced across the walls, not mere absences of light, but entities that hungered for fear, for pain. At the center of it all was the heart, a swirling vortex of darkness that pulsed with a sickening light. It was the source of the infection, the wellspring from which the madness flowed, and it was alive, aware. I could feel its gaze upon me, a pressure that threatened to obliterate my very being. It knew me, knew the darkness that I'd let into my heart, and it called to me, a siren song that promised oblivion, release from the pain. But I was done being a pawn in this twisted game. The rage that had sustained me, that had kept the madness at bay, flared within me, a supernova of defiance. I screamed, a sound that was both a battle cry and a lament, and charged at the heart my weapon raised. The shadows surged to meet me, a tidal wave of despair that sought to smother my light. But I was a tempest, a hurricane of fury and vengeance. I fought with the ferocity I didn't know I possessed, every strike a blow against the darkness that sought to claim me. But it was all in vain. It could not be defeated. I was thrown into the street. The city around me was unrecognizably, its buildings twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves, streets now winding paths that led to nowhere and everywhere at once. The shadows had retreated, but their absence left a void, a palpable sense of dread that hung in the air like a shroud. I moved through the streets, a specter in a landscape of nightmares. The people I passed were changed, their eyes empty, their movements erratic. The darkness had touched them too, marked them in ways that went beyond the physical. They were shells, haunted by echoes of the horrors they'd witnessed, the very essence of their humanity eroded by fear. Violence erupted in bursts, sudden and brutal. Gangs roamed the streets, emboldened by the chaos, their conflicts now battles of annihilation. The air was thick with the scent of blood and fire, the city a battlefield on which the last vestiges of order were being ground into dust. I fought when I had to, my movements fueled by a desperate need to survive, to find some thread of sanity in the unraveling tapestry of the world. But each encounter left me more hollow, the violence a reminder of the darkness that lurked within, eager to consume me. As I moved deeper into the heart of the city, the distortions grew more pronounced, reality bending in upon itself in ways that defied comprehension. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes, streets folded into endless loops, and the sky. The sky was a canvas of swirling colors, a psychedelic nightmare that blotted out the sun. The shadows swirled around me, their whispers now clear. They spoke of a choice, a decision that rested on my shoulders. I could join them, become a part of the darkness and guide its spread, or I could stand against it, fight for a world that was already dying. In that moment, standing on the brink of oblivion, I understood the true horror of my situation. There was no victory to be found here, no happy ending. The world had unraveled, and with it any semblance of the life I had known. The detective, the man who had sought to uncover the truth, was gone, replaced by a creature of the abyss, a being forged in the fires of chaos. I had become the very thing I had fought against, a harbinger of the darkness. D-7, who came up with D-7? Who decided to change the whole world? Whoever it was, they succeeded.